and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, following talks with Ukrainian officials in Jeddah, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine would be offered to Russia. The Kremlin says it's waiting for the US to provide details about that proposed 30-day ceasefire deal with Ukraine. At those talks, Ukraine says it's committed to peace, and in a sign that fences have been mended with President Trump, Washington says it agrees to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And as the European Union imposes retaliatory tariffs on US products, the banking giant JP Morgan says it forecasts a 40% chance of a US recession this year. Hello and welcome to the program. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he expects strong measures from the United States if Russia does not agree to Washington's proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Ukraine. Well, despite having agreed to put the US ceasefire proposal to Moscow, President Zelensky said today that Kyiv had no trust in Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it is willing to discuss security guarantees with its partners after the implementation of the proposed ceasefire. Well, let's get more analysis on those talks in Jeddah. We can speak now to Fred Fleitz, former Chief of Staff of the United States National Security Council under President Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again on Al Arabiya News. Just want to start by asking you how you think Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz got on in Jeddah on Tuesday.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, but I like to first start by thanking the Crown Prince for his leadership and generosity in hosting this important meeting and for acting as an intermediary. We now see Saudi Arabia as a trusted interlocutor for the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. It was frankly hard to find a trusted peacemaker to help with this effort. And, maybe there's a Nobel Prize coming out that Saudi Arabian Crown Prince will be someone who will be getting it or sharing it. I think that this was a very successful meeting. Waltz and Rubio came to Saudi Arabia to try to further repair relations with Ukraine and set the stage for a ceasefire that hopefully will lead to a long-term settlement. Now, there'll be a 30-day ceasefire. Russia accepts. We know from history that short-term ceasefires are often extended for long periods. We saw that with a ceasefire between Yemen and Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. So I'm very optimistic, but right now the ball is in Russia's court.
Okay, so 8 hours of talks in Jeddah on Tuesday. I mean, do you think we are now looking at the beginning of the end of that war in Ukraine?
I hope we're at the beginning of the end. A lot of negotiations still have to take place. Russia is looking for details of the agreement. There's going to have to be some pretty sophisticated diplomacy to get Russian President Putin to sign on to this agreement and to abide by it. I think it's a good first step. There's going to be tough negotiations afterwards on how to get a lasting peace. And there's also going to be discussions on how to verify the agreement. Now, the U.S. has proposed European and non-European peacekeepers to be deployed to Ukraine. Will this happen? What states will contribute to such a peacekeeping force? That still has to be worked out.
I mean, Ukraine obviously wants security guarantees, and it thought it was going to get them in the form of perhaps NATO membership. As you mentioned, there's that talk of peacekeepers, although Russia said no to peacekeepers from what it deems to be hostile countries. What about this minerals deal, though? I mean, some people we've spoken to on this channel have said that inside that deal is implied a security guarantee, but others have told us they don't think it's adequate. What's your feeling?
Well, first of all, NATO membership is not in the cards, and that's not America's decision. There would have to be a unanimous vote of NATO members, and it's going to be blocked by several countries if it is ever put to a vote. There's been talk of security guarantees and some type of military force that would be in Ukraine to enforce an agreement. that will prevent a peace agreement. I know there are European states that want to do that. Russia's not going to agree to have NATO troops in Ukraine to enforce an agreement. I think peacekeepers are a security guarantee. I think they are a way to keep both sides honest and to make sure an agreement is complied with. Now, concerning the minerals deal may be a security guarantee down the road. In the short term, it's not going to have any effect in making sure that both sides agree to comply with a ceasefire or peace agreement, because it will take so long to implement efforts by the U.S. to extract rare earth minerals from Ukraine. But I think long term, it gives the U.S. an economic commitment to Ukraine that will help sustain an agreement.
I mean, what's, looking at it from Moscow's perspective, what's Russia's incentive to agree to a ceasefire or even to cede any territory at this particular moment? It looks a lot like they've got the upper hand on the battlefield, and they're even taking back some of the territory in Kursk that Ukraine took hold of in August of last year. I mean, why would Russia, what's in it for Russia?
This has been a disastrous war for Russia. It's been more disastrous for Ukraine, but Russia has sunk enormous amounts of money and lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers in this terrible war. Russia could end its isolation, rejoin the international community as a state with a good reputation, rejoin Europe as a European state. There's so many opportunities for Russia if it was to agree to stop this war. And I think what we see here is an opportunity for Putin to take advantage of a small window in time where there is a leader who wants to work with him and give him a deal that's fair as possible. That's Donald Trump. There's not going to be another leader on the world scene anytime soon who will give Putin this opportunity. He can end this war in the best situation possible. I hope he'll take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, how do you view the relationship between those two men, who we understand might be due to speak on the telephone quite soon? They might even meet in the not too distant future as well. How do you see their relationship helping to bring about an end to this war?
You know, Trump's been criticized for not attacking Putin as a war criminal and for his involvement in the war. And that's been deliberate because Trump is a deal maker. He believes that the president of the United States has to have a working relationship with heads of state, of friends and foes, and demonizing Putin is not in America's interest. You and I can do that, but presidents can't do that. Joe Biden made a real mistake doing that, and by not talking to Putin since February 2022. So there's going to be a transactional relationship. We're going to have our differences. We're not going to agree with things Russia has done or will do, but we're going to try to get along with Russia and push it to be a state in good standing with the international community and not a state that continues to drive this vicious war with Ukraine.
I mean, there are loads of things happening at the moment. The head of the CIA and the Russian equivalent is speaking on the telephone. We're told that the two presidents of Russia and the United States might speak soon. The US envoy, Steve Witkoff, due to meet President Putin as well. I mean, it seems like a lot is happening with regards to sort of re-establishing relations between Moscow and Washington. I mean, that's surely going to help, isn't it, with regards to bringing about an end to the war in Ukraine. And I'm just wondering, do you think that's part of the strategy, the broader strategy, sort of a carrot, if you like, to encourage Russia to engage?
Trump's priority for years has been to stop the killing in Ukraine and to open up negotiations to resolve other issues later. He has a full court press. Just about all his national security officials are working on the Ukraine problem. He's serious about this. It's in strong contrast to what we've seen over the past 4 years, where there was no serious effort by Europe or the United States to end this conflict. They just wanted to keep sending weapons, but they had no plan for Ukraine to win or to end the war. Trump thought that was unacceptable. He thinks this is a war that has become an endless war of attrition. Ukraine will eventually lose, and that it is immoral to keep plowing weapons into this war for Ukraine. When it's just going to mean they're going to run out of troops. So I think this is the best and most moral approach that Trump is pursuing, but we need Putin's cooperation. I hope we get it.
Okay, it looks like things are much better between the US and Ukrainian leaders. The United States agreeing to resume military aid, intelligence sharing with Ukraine. President Trump saying he's ready to welcome President Zelensky back to the White House. I mean, would you say the fences have been mended?
I think so. And there's no question that the president twisted Zelensky's arm to get him to take his approach that the priority has to be a ceasefire. We'll negotiate other issues later. That was not the position of Zelensky or Europe or the Biden administration. It's a different approach, but Trump made it clear this is the only way, or he's walking away. And Zelensky's behind him now, and I think that's a great thing. And it allows us to go to Russia as a united front to press the case that this is the best solution, both for Ukraine and for Russia.
Okay, and just lastly, slightly mixed messages. The Kremlin saying it's still waiting to be briefed by the United States on that framework that was agreed on in Jeddah. But assuming they are briefed, do you think they're likely to accept the proposed ceasefire? What's your hunch?
I think they're likely to accept, but as I said, it's going to take some pretty sophisticated diplomacy. It's going to take a one-on-one discussion between Trump and Putin to make the case on why this ceasefire is the beginning of an agreement that is in the best interest of Russia and the Russian people.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Fred Fleitz, a great pleasure speaking
to be here.
Now, Ukraine's President Zelensky says he's ready to accept the proposed 30-day ceasefire deal with Russia. And the US President Donald Trump says he hopes that a ceasefire can be achieved during the coming days. Well, President Zelensky says it's now up to the US to convince Russia to agree to the new proposal. Well, it's been suggested by the Kremlin that President Putin and President Trump could be on track to have a telephone conversation in the short term. Meanwhile, the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who was at the talks in Jeddah, is due to travel to Russia during the days ahead. So, following on from those talks in Saudi Arabia, we've established the US has agreed to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and Ukraine says it's ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire with Russia. Well, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he'll offer to Moscow that he hopes Russia will accept the proposal.
Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. Hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court, and I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Sergey Markov, who is the former spokesperson for President Vladimir Putin, who joins us from Moscow. Great to have you with us once again, Mr. Markov. The United States says the ball is in Russia's court. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, United States made a clear suggestion based on the agreement also of Ukrainian authorities about ceasefire during the month and with possible negotiation about a stable peace deal. So Russia now should get more details and to give the response. You may know that President Putin many times told that Russia is interested about stable peace, but not ceasefire, because ceasefire will be used by Ukrainian regime and by Western coalition behind Ukrainian regime for the total militarization of Ukraine, a total weaponization of Ukrainian army, and total mobilization of the young generation of Ukrainian people to the army. And again, they will violate such peace agreement and will start the war again. Russia already has experience of Minsk I and Minsk II agreement, which have been sharply violated by Western countries and by Ukrainian regime. And you may know that Western countries and Ukrainian regime even denied to accept that they violated such agreement. That's why no any trust from Russian side to the Western countries and to the Ukrainian regime. So what could be the solution? No, I don't think so. I think Russian answer will be yes, but. And this but means that it will be which will prevent such total militarization and weaponization of the Ukrainian regime. It means weaponry embargo of the supplying of Ukrainian army by weapons from arms from Western countries. I think it will be the solution. Also because it's a break of the war, possibly some of the sanctions should be lifted by Western countries as well.
Okay, Mr. Markov, let me just pick up on that point about the concerns that the ceasefire will be used to rearm, regroup. I mean, Ukraine could argue exactly the same thing, couldn't it?
The difference is that Russia is saying the truth and Ukrainian illegal criminal regime is saying the lie. Everybody knows this. You know about this because you inform journalists. President of the United States knows about this. President of France, Prime Ministers of Great Britain and Germany also know very well that they supported criminal repressive regime. They have information from intelligence service which shows them the real situation. Your audience, probably because of political censorship in European and Western media, don't know about this. But all leaders of Western countries have information from their intelligence service and know on 100% that Russia is right and Ukrainian regime is lying.
Okay, well, we are where we are.
So
and
let's base on reality.
Yeah, okay, well, we've got this 30-day ceasefire on the table. You're saying there's a massive amount of mistrust. Well, it's on both sides, I think. Do you think the relationship between President Donald Trump and President Putin can help to bridge some of the gaps?
Yes, the relation between Putin and Trump can help to the peace deal because we know that Joe Biden was personally hatred Vladimir Putin. He was kind of anti-Russian maniac. Same State Secretary under the Biden administration, Antony Blinken, was also maniac because his grandfather was from Kiev, many years ago, and they would be a maniac. But Donald Trump wants peace. It's absolutely clear, as we understand. Maybe he don't know how to make this peace. Maybe Donald Trump too much on the influence of so-called deep state of the United States. Maybe he will have to take into account reality of the Ukrainian and European alliance for the war. It's another point. But Donald Trump wants peace. It's what we're sure about. By the way, also an important issue is security guarantee for Ukraine. And of course, Russia agreed that both sides should have security guarantee. Security guarantee for Russia should be denazification and demilitarization of Ukrainian regime and democracy for Ukraine. Same security guarantee for Ukraine, because Ukraine lived in absolute security situation between 1991 and 2014 when neo-Nazi coup happened in Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine was independent. Because Ukraine was a democratic country. So this is solution for security of Ukraine, to come back to the democratic political regime as Ukraine has during 23 years before 2014 neo-Nazi pro-American putsch.
Okay, let me just ask you about a statement made by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, who says there is no way in which NATO troops would be acceptable to police the longer-term peace arrangement in Ukraine. How can a ceasefire, short or long-term, be policed, in your opinion? How can anyone be sure it's going to hold?
Yes, I already mentioned. The main guarantee for Ukraine is democracy and stopping political repression against pro-Russian people, stopping political repression against Russian language, stopping political repression against Orthodox Church. You understand? You should understand. If Ukrainian regime will continue to prohibit Russian language, it will be never security. Russia again and again will try to come to the Ukrainian territory to save Russian people. And if Ukrainian regime will continue political repression against Orthodox Church, it's again Russia for sure, on the 100%, sometime would like to come and to save Orthodox Church from repression. But stopping political repression, it's a clear solution. As to the European countries, they're not neutral. Everybody said they're part of the war. Why peacekeepers should be part of the war? No, the peacekeepers should be peacekeepers should be from neutral countries like Indonesia and India. You know, there are a lot of neutral countries. But all troops, all soldiers from the NATO countries, which is part of the war against Russia, will be regarded by Russia as occupants, and all European soldiers on the Ukrainian soil will be killed by Russian soldiers.
Okay, so if no soldiers from any NATO or European countries would be acceptable to Russia, it would only be peacekeepers from neutral countries. What do you make of the minerals deal that the United States and Ukraine are striking, which has some implied security guarantees in it for Ukraine? How does Russia view that?
Russia view this mineral resources deal as trick. It's just a falsification from the both Ukrainian and American side. Zelensky wants to show that he is loyal to the Donald Trump, and Donald Trump wants to show to all audience that America has something instead as money coming back from Ukrainian spending of American money. But it's not true. Ukraine has not so many such mineral resources, and they're producing. It's a long-term business which needs greater investment. So it's more tricks from both Zelensky and Trump for the different reasons.
There are concerns, Mr. Markov, that Russia is not showing any signs of being willing to compromise. I haven't heard anything from Moscow that sounds like compromise. But if there are going to be negotiations, there's going to have to be some compromise, isn't there?
The compromise is very easily. It could be solved. First of all, Russia, to satisfy Russia, it should be guarantees that will be not full militarization. But as you understand, Great Britain, for example, Germany, France, they want just to use this fire for the full militarization of Ukraine, and they want to make relation between Russia and Ukrainians as between Palestinians and Israelis. No, we don't want. To certify military embargo and general peace solutions very easily. And I even surprised why Europeans don't talk about it. Democracy for Ukraine, free elections, freedom of speech. You should know that hundreds of the media prohibited by Zelensky. Freedom of political activity. You should know that 20 opposition political parties, including Communist Party, is prohibited by Ukrainian regime. Freedom for the religious activity. It's exactly the solution, and this exactly could be compromised. Ukraine needs peace, but not terroristic neo-Nazi regime which we have now. Only the problem is that Europe already not democratic because Europe created this neo-Nazi anti-democratic regime in Ukraine. And you can see on the election, for example, in Romania, which had been sharply violated all democratic principles. So it's a problem. The problem is that Europe wants war, not peace. And either we can reach compromise. If we're Russian, we want peace. How we can reach compromise with those who want only war and death?
Well, I mean, to be fair, Ukraine said in Jeddah it did want peace, and that was one of the key points that came out of those talks.
No. Just how you can say, Ukrainians want peace, but Zelensky deny any peace.
Well, Zelensky wasn't in Jeddah.
3 years. He agreed only under the pressure of Donald Trump. Ukrainians want peace, but Zelensky want war.
Okay, it was the delegation in Jeddah on Tuesday that said they wanted peace. Just moving forward, Mr. Markov, I mean, loads of things are happening, and I want to get your opinion just before we finish.
Yes.
I mean, we've got the head of the CIA and the head of Russia's SVR, Foreign Intelligence Agency, are holding talks. They've spoken on the telephone, in fact. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, says a high-level telephone conversation probably going to happen between Washington and Moscow. I assume that means two presidents are going to be speaking on the telephone. Are you seeing signs that this 3-year-long war is going to come to an end anytime soon?
Yes, I think my personal guess that probability to make a peace deal during this spring, something about 30%. But probability of making peace deal to the end of this year already 65%. It's my general guess. And also, we are talking about US-Russia relationship. You should divide very clearly. One is about Ukrainian war. It can be successful or not successful. But absolutely another problem is bilateral US-Russian relationship. They come back from the boycotting, which had been used by previous Biden administration. And now this relationship between US and Russia intelligence service agencies is part of this recovering of the normal diplomatic relationship. It's also connected with China, because Donald Trump believes that it's full stupidity of Joe Biden that by their cutting relations with Russia, they moved Russia to the China, which is the main long-term competitor to the United States.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your time. As ever, Sergey Markov, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, Ukraine hopes its ceasefire offer will turn the tables on Russia. Well, by agreeing to a truce, it wins back some American support and it puts heat on the Kremlin. Well, President Zelensky's top advisor says that security guarantees remain a key issue for Ukraine. Well, this comes as Russian troops continue their advance in Russia's western Kursk region and recapture villages from Ukrainian forces there. Well, Kyiv's forces seized a slice of the region in a cross-border incursion back in August of last year. Well, the Russian Defense Ministry said earlier on today that it had taken back 5 settlements in that region.
I think that the expectation of Russia, it's not just from Ukraine. I think from today's this joint statement, this expectation of the world, Russia needs to say very clearly, they want peace or not. They want to end this war, which they started or not.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Rudik, who is the leader of the Holos Party in Ukraine, who joins us now from Kyiv. Great to have you with us once again here on Al Arabiya News, Kira. Thanks for your time. Just wanted to start by asking you what your feeling is towards that ceasefire proposal that was discussed yesterday in Saudi Arabia.
Hello, Tom, and thank you so much for having me. Well, we are moderately optimistic. because, for us, we always knew that Ukraine was not the problem, that Russia is the problem, Russia is the aggressor, Russia has attacked us and continues brutally attacking our peaceful cities and at the front line. So the question is, would Russia accept this ceasefire deal? And what would be the new administration's steps if they would not? And it is unclear as of right now, but we're really hopeful that if new administration was able to put pressure on Ukraine, they will find a way to put pressure on Russia as well.
So we're about 10 days on from that famous meeting in the Oval Office at the White House. And I just want to ask you, where things stand now and how you think the relationship between Presidents Trump and Zelensky is looking today.
I think the situation looks much better. And yesterday's meeting ended up first Ukrainian delegation giving all kinds of gratitudes and gratefulness that was expected. And then President Trump said that President Zelensky may return to White House for further discussions. We take it as a good sign. And I think we can be constructive from here. I want to make it very clear that it is not our goal of our nation for President Trump and President Zelensky to be friends, right? Our goal is to end the war and to make sure that Russia would not attack us again. So we will be trying to get there with all the means that are in our hands right now.
Do you feel, though, at all that Ukraine is somehow being pressured into making compromises and that Russia isn't responding by making corresponding compromises?
Well, we haven't seen that the United States would be putting some pressure to Russia. This is why we are very interested to see what would be a reaction of Russia to the US proposal. And if they will decline that, what would happen next? Because, we have seen that it was rather easier to pressure Ukraine into getting into the table of negotiations because we are dependent on the United States for our military aid and intelligence. And we didn't see what was in the, quoting Donald Trump, what is in the cards for Russia. So I think we will observe that. Of course, I think that for Ukraine, it was easier for the United States to bring Ukraine to the table than it would be to deal with Russia.
Just before we spoke to you, we were speaking to Sergey Markov, who is a former spokesperson for President Putin, and he said he was concerned that the ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire, would be used by Ukraine to regroup and rearm. What do you say to that?
I don't know if I can comment. A person from the country that started full-scale invasion, whose soldiers committed all kinds of the war crimes and were trying to get away with it. There is nothing that I can say to that.
Okay, but you could say that Russia might do exactly the same thing.
Well, that would be up to the United States, right? So first, I think proposing the ceasefire is a very brave offer because somebody will need to make sure that the ceasefire is kept. And since 2014, we have seen that Russia didn't keep their part of the bargain, though they were interested in the ceasefire at the eastern territories of Ukraine. So we will see, and the devil will be in details. Right now, I think the first step for the US administration is to bring Russia to the table. I think it's important to say, Tom, that if Ukraine regroups and strengthens, we are doing that in defending our territory, protecting our people, and fighting against the aggressor, who should not be on our territory at all, if you count the international laws valid.
One of the things you put out on X, formerly known as Twitter, in the last couple of hours, you say, we've always known Russia isn't into peace or real ceasefires, and last night's missile and drone attacks on our cities proved that once again. If Russia isn't serious about peace or ceasefires, should these talks be taking place at all?
Well, we think that it is really appreciated that President Trump thinks that you can end the war with the talks. We think, and we have been proving that Russia is not interested in peace. Russia is interested in peace. And we think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We think that the US administration is not interested in peace. We You can end the war if Ukraine is strong enough to push Russia out of our territories. But we respect his approach and his hope that he will find a way for the peace through strength. And that's why we can move along with the proposed step by step. Again, Ukraine is not the problem. Russia is the problem, and the United States will have to figure out how to make sure that Russia will keep their part of the bargain, if there is a bargain. And the most important, what would happen if Russia wouldn't come to the table of negotiation, wouldn't agree to the ceasefire, wouldn't agree to the peace deal? Again, that would be not something that we haven't seen in the past.
It sounds to me like you don't think Russia, it doesn't sound like you think Russia is negotiating in good faith here.
Well, we are talking again about the aggressor who absolutely knew what they were doing when they started full-scale invasion, when they were committing war crimes, when they were occupying sovereign territories of Ukraine, when they were killing Ukrainians, when they were kidnapping Ukrainian children. So why in the world they would want to stop? I do not see any reason for them of doing that. And this is why we haven't seen any single fact supporting the statement from President Trump that Russia wants peace. They keep attacking us at the front line. They keep attacking us in our peaceful cities by missiles and drones. For us, it is not any confirmation, quite the opposite, of a country that is interested in peace. This is why right now, because the United States have taken on the responsibility to put the war into end their way, we are going along with that. But our position remaining the same. If Ukraine is armed to the teeth, we can fight back, and we will do that. And we are hoping that we will have a chance to fight back and to end the war by throwing an aggressor out of our territories.
The Kremlin saying today that there could be a very high-level telephone conversation between Moscow and Washington. Sounds a lot like the presidents of both countries are gearing up to have a conversation. Also reports that they might even meet at some point in the not-too-distant future. Do you think President Trump is going to be able to use his relationship with President Putin to somehow deliver results where others have not been able to do so in the past?
We can go ahead with the best faith in what President Trump said that he hopes to achieve. However, I think for the geopolitics, it is a very dangerous precedent that is being set, showing that president of the strongest democracy and one of the strongest countries in the world is ready to negotiate with the terrorists. I think that would bring all the other dictators to go along and try to attack their neighbors, commit all kinds of the war crimes, and just then hope to get away with it based on their personal relations with someone. This is not the way how it should be, and I think this dangerous precedent will bite America back at some point, because I think it was very important to show the terrorists in the past they will not be negotiated with. It will have the consequences in Middle East, in the Indo-Pacific, and in South America. And I think then the US will get into much more troubles than they are trying to resolve right now in Ukraine.
NATO membership sounds like it is still one of Russia's red lines. And I'm just wondering what the key security guarantees are that Ukraine is seeking in any potential peace deal.
So the first thing would be that these guarantees need to be executable. So it cannot be like Budapest Memorandum, where everybody makes promises that will never come to life. The security guarantees may be protecting Ukrainian sky by international forces, putting wide-range weapons into Ukraine so that we will be able to deter any potential Russian further invasion. It's strengthening Ukraine's army and providing us with the ability to manufacture the weapons that we would need to stand against Russia. But if you have a question about NATO, if Russia is a country that can say who can join NATO and who is not, then it means it's that altogether NATO is weaker than the country that is not even their member, right? This absolutely ununderstandable how the country that is not in the alliance can dictate who and when can join the alliance, right?
Indeed, it's an ironic point that you make there. So, what security guarantees aside from NATO would Ukraine absolutely insist on? I mean, what do you think about the minerals deal, for example, which some have suggested on this channel? You know, that deal does include security guarantees for Ukraine. What do you think?
Tom, we haven't seen the details of the minerals deal, but from what we have heard, it is an agreement that Ukraine will provide its rare minerals to compensate for previous American investment into Ukraine's economy and fighting. But it did not include any feasible or viable security guarantees like the planes, closed sky, etc. So as for having US business on the ground, we, of course, applaud to that, but we do not take it as really workable security guarantees. I have been here in Kyiv in 2022, and I have witnessed how American businesses were fleeing and how American embassy was fleeing weeks before the full-scale invasion started. So we do not take that having US business on the ground alone will be a feasible security guarantees. However, the minerals deal may become the first step in then providing us with the security guarantees that would actually work.
And just lastly, Kira, I mean, just to wrap up, I mean, there seem to be some people in the United States who are arguing that prolonging the war with continued Western aid will simply mean more losses of life and greater losses all round for Ukraine in the long run. What's your response to that argument?
If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. We didn't start it. We are simply defending ourselves. And we want to have all the means to defend ourselves the right way, the proper way, the way that we will throw aggressor away. Tom, I think we have been talking a lot about what would happen if Ukraine wins, but we have not been talking enough about what would happen if Ukraine loses. And then where Russian forces be and who will be fighting them then? I think it's a very good question to ask both our European allies and then those voices that you mentioned in the United States.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As always, great talking to you, Kira Rudik, leader of the Holos Party in Ukraine. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
And finally, the European Union has hit back at US President Donald Trump's blanket tariffs on steel and aluminium. The EU will impose counter tariffs on about $28 billion worth of US goods from next month. All bloc said it remained open to negotiations. Well, President Trump's increased tariffs of 25% on all steel and aluminium imports took effect today as prior exemptions, duty-free quotas and product exclusions expired. Meanwhile, the European Commission said it will end its current suspension of tariffs on US products on the 1st of April, and that its tariffs will be fully in place by the 13th of April. Well, for more, we can speak now to James Rickards, economist and New York Times bestselling author of Money GPT, AI and the Threat to the Global Economy. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Lots of concerns at the moment on Wall Street, starting the week off with some downward facing arrows, concerns about a recession. Just want to ask you first of all about the impact of tariffs and what they might do to the US economy, which has just emerged from a long inflationary cycle. Could tariffs push inflation back up again?
Almost certainly not. The tariffs are not very well understood. When you have tariffs, there are three sort of parties to the transaction. It could be more, but there are at least three. There's an exporter, China, Vietnam, Mexico, as the case may be. Then there's an importer in the U.S. who is probably a wholesaler or a distributor. And then there's the consumer who actually buys the goods, the supermarket, or it could be an automobile or anything else. Well, somebody pays the tariffs, but it's almost certainly not the consumer. Generally speaking, and the economic research shows us, the tariff actually gets pushed back to the producer. In other words, that the producer has got to lower his price so that with the tariff, it comes out about the same. Or it could be put on the U.S. importer, the distributor, who would then have to absorb the tariff. Or in the real world, it's probably split between the two. But the point is, the exporter and the importer reduce their margins and reduce their profits, and the price to the consumer is about the same. I mean, think about it. Let's say you could raise consumer prices. Why wouldn't you just do that? I mean, who needs a tariff? If you can raise consumer prices, you would just do it to make more profits. The point is, they can't do it. The U.S. economy is probably in a recession for reasons that have nothing to do with tariffs. Consumers are highly elastic. The only thing that's inelastic is gasoline. You have to buy gas at the pump because you have to get to work or take the kids to school. So consumers don't pay the tariffs. The importer and the exporter might share it in some way, but all that does, it reduces their profits, reduces their margins, causes them to become more efficient if they can, but the consumers don't pay. So the inflationary impact is nil. Meanwhile, the positive impact on the economy of saying what the U.S. is saying to the world basically is we're done being the consumer of last resort. You are trading partners. You can sell anything you want to Americans, but you have to build it here. You have to build it in America to get over the tariff wall. And we're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars of new investment coming into the United States. So that's going to create high-paying jobs. Okay,
so you're not concerned about reports, for example, JP Morgan putting out the percentage guess. They're forecasting 40% chance of a recession this year. You don't see things heading that way?
Well, I do. Actually, I would say we're probably already in a recession. My point is that it's nothing to do with tariffs.
Okay, you don't think tariffs are going to exacerbate that because of the pain they cause to, for example, small businesses, or could it affect the unemployment rate, do you think?
Well, again, the unemployment rate will probably go up. The U.S. is probably in a recession. Those two things are true. I agree with them. There's a lot of other evidence that would support that. But my point is, it has nothing to do with tariffs. See, look, stocks go up and down, and the financial media and Wall Street, they need a story. Everyone's like, why are stocks going down? So they need a story. So the tariffs are real. They're coming. But first of all, most of them are not in place. Secondly, even if they were in place, it would take months or maybe a year or longer to really affect the macroeconomy. And three, my point is they won't cause inflation. They won't hit consumers. They'll hit producers, which will result in greater investment in the U.S., higher paying jobs, and it's good for the consumer. So the long-term aspects of this are very positive, but we might not see that until 2026. This year, we probably are in a recession. We do have to get through it, but it has nothing to do with tariffs. This has been coming for a year. I mean, you can see the signs. Negative swap spreads, inverted yield curves, then uninverting, which means the recession's here. All those signs have been developing for over a year. So the recession comes as no surprise. But tariffs are just not part of the story. But having said that, again, people on Wall Street want a story, so they've made up this tariff story.
Which sectors of the economy, which industries are likely to be most impacted by the tariffs?
Well, certainly, there's some positive stories here. I would say the defense industry is a positive story because the U.S. is going to have to rebuild arsenals after wasting so much in the war in Ukraine. The automobile industry, I'm very bullish on Ford Motor Company. Ford did not waste as much money on electric vehicles as General Motors did, so they're in a better position going forward. We're going to see, we're going to take away subsidies on electric vehicles, get back to internal combustion engines, which are much better for the economy. I mean, CO2 has no impact on the climate based on the best science. So we get the EV Green New Scam behind us, and then move into traditional manufacturing. So I would say automobiles and defense are good sectors. The sectors that will be hurt, I really don't see that many. I have this debate all the time, by the way. I talk to a lot of people about it, and they say to me, Jim, these tariffs, we understand why they might be good for the United States, but they're going to be bad for the rest of the world. And I say, too bad. I mean, Xi Jinping should, if he wants to make China great again, then get started, but don't blame the United States. So this is very bullish for the United States, but it is bad for, Brazil. I'm surprised we haven't heard more about Vietnam. If you look at the U.S. bilateral trade deficits, one of the biggest in the world is with Vietnam. China obviously is the number one culprit. So this is going to hurt China. It's probably going to slow down Vietnam. May hurt India, Malaysia, and some other trading partners, Canada, but it's very good for the United States.
So when you see figures like the one put out by the Yale Budget Lab, calculating these tariffs are going to cost the average US household as much as $3,400 a year, I mean, you're saying that's simply not going to be the case.
Yeah, the Yale, I don't know exactly who's working in the Yale Economics Lab, but I do know that major Ivy League universities, National Bureau of Economic Research, MIT, traditional economists know very little about the economy. So they just take a very simple model, which is, you buy this much from abroad, add on a tariff, divide by the number of consumers, and come up with a number that's going to cost the consumers. Everything about what I just said is wrong. It's bad modeling, bad economics. As I already explained, the tariffs actually get pushed back to the exporter. They don't affect the consumer, number one. And number two, that's a very static analysis. It doesn't account for adaptive behavior. And adaptive behavior would include if Apple's putting $500 billion into the United States, if Taiwan Semiconductor is putting in even more, well, not more than Apple right away, but over $100 billion building new fabrication plants in the United States. And there are many other examples. Honda is putting in a new automobile factory in the United States. They're not going to Canada. Volkswagen is crying because they just built, their Audi line built a large factory to build the Q5, which is an SUV. That's the most popular brand in Mexico. And they're like, wait a second, you're going to put tariffs in Mexico? Well, too bad, Volkswagen. You should have thought of that and put it in the United States, as a lot of your competitors did. So that's, as I say, that's all good investment in the United States. It's going to be a stronger dollar because those foreign companies are going to have to get dollars, borrow dollars, or somehow convert into dollars to make those investments in the United States. So I would look for a stronger dollar, higher paying jobs. As I say, very good for the U.S.
Is there a danger that tariffs, as some are suggesting, on particular Canadian and Mexican goods could disrupt supply chains? Do you think that's something that's likely to happen?
That's a real danger, but it points to a solution, which is Trump is serious about the tariffs. So I'm not suggesting this is bluster. He's not bluffing. That's not the case. Having said that, he's all about the art of the deal. So what he's saying to Canada is, if you don't make any concessions, if you don't reduce your tariffs. I lived in Canada for a couple of years. I also live in New England in the United States. We have great dairy products in New Hampshire and Vermont and elsewhere in the United States, Wisconsin. You can't find them in Canada. Try buying Vermont cheddar cheese in Montreal. It's not there. So there are Canadian tariffs on U.S. goods, and cheese may sound trivial, but dairy industry is pretty big. But there are many other examples, liquor and so forth. Trudeau, he's out now, but he said when Trump first mentioned the tariffs, he says, I'm taking all the U.S. liquor off the shelves. We're not going to sell it. I've been to Canadian liquor stores. There's not that much U.S. liquor to begin with. You can't find California wine. You can get French wine. But my point being, Canadian tariffs on U.S. trade are onerous, far worse than what the U.S. puts on. So what Trump's saying is, two can play. We're going to put them on you. Now, if you want to sit and talk and have negotiations and lower them across the board, that's a very positive outcome. So, in the short run, there could be some supply chain disruptions. I agree with that. And maybe that will cause prices to go up, not because of the tariffs themselves, but just because of the supply chain impact. But it kind of opens the door to negotiations and getting that behind us.
Okay, so just lastly, just to wrap up, and this is really to conclude all the points you've made up until this point, you're not seeing there being much likelihood of any major impact from these tariffs on overall consumer spending and economic growth for the United States economy?
I wouldn't see any short-term impact in terms of inflation or that slowing the economy. The U.S. economy, just to be clear, the U.S. economy is slowing. We're probably in a recession. Prices are going to come down. We're probably going to see disinflation, if not deflation, and much lower interest rates. All of that is happening, but it's happening for reasons unrelated to the tariffs. When you talk strictly about the tariffs, I would say going forward, really maybe more in 2026 and 2025, it's very positive for the consumer because, it's a famous story, and it's true. Sometime around in the 19 teens, maybe 1915 or so, could be off by a year or two, Henry Ford gave his workers a $5 raise. And the other big industrial said, "Are you crazy? Why are you giving the workers a raise?" And he said, "I want them to be able to afford to buy my cars." And that's the point. We're going to get high-paying jobs out of tariffs, and that's going to help consumption.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time and for helping us make sense of all that. James Rickards, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's all we have time for today's edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching. Do join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.